just outside the door, just outside the door is the end of the world. And you are the only one who can save it. Because you are the only one that could take the step into beloved community. No one can take that step for you. More than any other idea, it was beloved community that informed the life and work of Martin Luther King Jr. Underlying desegregation was equal rights. Underlying equal rights was economic justice. But underlying economic justice, and so underlying it all, was the work for beloved community. In the book Search for the Beloved Community, The Thinking of Martin Luther King Jr., the authors write that the concept of beloved community can be traced through all of his speeches and writings, from the earliest to the last. In one of his first published articles, he stated that the purpose of the Montgomery boycott is reconciliation, redemption, the creation of the beloved community. So what is the beloved community? In some ways, it takes its cues from the biblical notion of the kingdom of God and the peaceable kingdom, the one with the lions lying down with the lambs. But beloved community is not so mythic. It is also not so passive. Do not mistake nonviolence for passivity. Rather, as stated in an essay from the King Center for Nonviolence, Dr. King recognized that conflict was an inevitable part of human experience. But he believed that conflicts could be resolved peacefully and adversaries could be reconciled through mutual, determined commitment to nonviolence. No conflict, he believed, should erupt into violence. And all conflicts in the beloved community should end with reconciliation of adversaries cooperating together in a spirit of friendship and goodwill. So this is very personal, very interpersonal. Adversaries become friends. And friends form an ever-expanding community, an ever-expanding identity until at last, as this essay points out, Dr. King's beloved community becomes a global vision in which all people can share the wealth of the earth. In the beloved community, poverty, hunger, and homelessness will not be tolerated because international standards of human decency will not allow it. You're not going to let your friends starve. So the beloved community is a reality that is inclusive, reconciliation-oriented, where love and trust hold the power and nonviolence is the alpha and the omega. There are two absolutely crucial things for us to understand at this point. One, violence takes many forms. Not all of them are a club to the head. Some are psychological. Some, I would say probably most, are economic. Some are verbal. We must understand that as violence exists beyond the physical, so too must nonviolence. By physical, I mean physical abuse. So nonviolence must exist verbally, economically, socially. The second thing we must remember is this. King is talking about the powers and the haters. He's talking about oppressive governments, corrupt economies, and vile racists. But mostly he's talking about you. You. Because just outside the door is the end of the world, and you are the only one who can save it. Because if nonviolence doesn't start with you, beloved community doesn't stand a chance. You see, we, each of us, live in our own little house of awesome. Even if our lives are painful and our challenges many and overwhelming and out of our control, we each somehow managed a kind of equilibrium. We have psychologically arranged things just so, justified the horrible things we endure or do, justified our indulgences, inadequacies, and our overreaching. And if you're lucky enough to really not live lives beset by overwhelming challenges and pain, well, then your equilibrium is probably a little bit easier to buy. Trouble is, we mistake this equilibrium for reality. This equilibrium is the Buddha's childhood. We may not be princes with harems and servants, surrounded by high walls that protect the world, which contains only the highest beauty. But we are probably as in love with our comforts and justifications as Gautama was with his. But then the Buddha looked outside his door. And you remember what he saw. He saw the end of the world. He saw a world that was ending in death and disease, madness and hunger and injustice. He saw his world end because he could no longer buy the lie he had been fed, the lie that he had been gluttonously consuming for his whole life, even though part of him always knew, the part of him that wanted to go out, always knew it was a lie. That world ended, and he saw that only he could save the world outside. And with that, he took a step into beloved community, and it was a long journey. He did not get there the next day. Now, the ideal of beloved community and the ideal that Buddhism gives us are not necessarily the same, but they are similar, and the story of the Buddha's disillusionment is instructive and perhaps revealing about us. It makes the hero the one who overcomes denial. In this day and age, we need that. Holy cow, do we need that? We need that lest we forever think that Martin Luther King Jr. was always talking about them. Now, he was talking about us. For if we cannot practice nonviolence, what chance does the world have? If we cannot open the door of our interior sanctuary and understand the suffering of the world around us, the person near you, the person annoying you, then how is the beloved community ever to come about? And if it doesn't come about here, where? Trick is, we often do not see or know of the violence we commit. It's hard, so we must be vigilant, and we must watch ourselves and continue to learn. That's why offerings like Chuck Tatum's class on Latino and Latina culture, which are offered here every other Thursday, are spiritual exercises. Wednesday, thank you, Wednesday, every other Wednesday. These are spiritual exercises in developing the beloved community. They challenge our self-assumptions. Now, would you allow me to be your humble servant, your Chana? Would you allow me to crack open the door just a little so that we can see outside? Are you ready? Are you curious? Here we go. Our species faces an existential moment. That means a moment where our existence hangs in the balance. As we open the door, I will describe 4 ideas, 4 dots that I believe are connected. Dot 1, the madman. A recent study revealed that 97% of peer-reviewed papers, so almost 100% of peer-reviewed papers, taking a position on global warming found that A, it was occurring, yes, and B, that humans played a significant role in it. It's close to unanimity. Yet that same study found that only 45% of the public think there is any scientific consensus. Dot 2, the deceiver. Recently, Drexel University environmental sociologist Robert Bruhl found that 140 foundations funneled $558 million to almost 100 climate denial organizations from 2003 to 2010. Those are big numbers, but actually not that surprising. Meanwhile, the traceable cash, here's the point, the traceable cash flow from more traditional sources such as the Koch brothers and ExxonMobil disappeared. Why? Well, he also discovered that coinciding with a decline in traceable funding, there has been a dramatic rise, surprise, surprise, in the cash flowing to denial organizations from donor trusts, which is a donor-directed foundations whose funders cannot be traced. 25% of all traceable foundation funding used by organizations promoting systematic denial of climate change comes from that one organization. 25% of $558 million. From one organization, and we don't know who is giving the money. But Exxon and Mobil and Koch brothers are suddenly not giving money. Dot 3, the pauper. Income disparity is increasing. In spite of the Occupy movement, in spite of concerns about the reallocation of wealth, in spite of information. This is not news. What is news, perhaps, is that it's getting worse. Former Secretary of Labor Robert Reich reports that in 2013 marked one of the biggest redistributions of wealth in recent American history. So here comes socialism? Well, actually, Reich writes, it was a redistribution upward from average working people to the owners of America. So he describes how corporate earnings now represent the largest share of gross domestic product, which in and of itself, I don't know if that's so bad. But he concludes his sentence with this. Corporate earnings now represent the largest share of the gross domestic product and wages the smallest share. That's more so than at any time since records have been kept. Meanwhile, he notes that American corporations didn't make most of the money from increased sales. They made their big bucks mostly by reducing their biggest single cost. Wages. And this in a time when more than 2/3 of Americans live from paycheck to paycheck. To add injury to injury, he further notes that wealth is taxed at a lower rate than labor. I'll have to take his word for that. Dot 4, the abuser. Remember that in the story of the Buddha that I told you, Channa didn't fight back. Channa gave permission to be abused, and it was in service ultimately of Gautama, right? Under the U.S. Constitution, the Congress writes the laws that set trade policy. But there is a way for presidents to sneak around that by fast-tracking trade agreements, which then wind up trumping local, state, and national laws. A president, course, must be granted permission to do this by, I have it in parentheses, a lazy and cowardly Congress. It is an abdication of legislative responsibility and a concentration of power into the executive branch, now free of checks and balances. Currently, President Obama is seeking fast-track authority in order to ratify the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which is a NAFTA-like free trade deal for the Pacific. And the impacts of the TPP are massive. Aside from dispensing with the constitutional checks and balances, and hence democracy, there are questions ranging from internet freedom and freedom of expression to environmental impact, economic impact, national, local, legal authority. And this deal has been crafted out of the sight of Congress, but with the guidance of 600 trade advisors from multinational entities. Documents, of course, have been leaked. God bless the leakers. However, which has caused real concern among some interested parties. The website Public Citizen reports that of the TPP's 29 draft chapters, only 5 deal with traditional trade values or issues. Many of these chapters would impose limits on government policies that we rely on in our daily lives for safe food, a clean environment, and more. Our domestic, federal, state, and local policies would be required to comply with TPP rules. According to Joseph Stiglitz, who was a Nobel Prize-winning economist, he thinks that the TPP represents grave risks. Organized labor in the U.S. argues that the trade deal would largely benefit big business, surprise, surprise, at the expense of workers in the manufacturing and service industries. The Economic Policy Institute Center for Economic Policy have argued that the TPP could further result in further job losses and declining wages. And for me, the issue isn't whether or not it will do all that. It's whether or not it will do all that without our representatives getting a chance to represent us. The bottom line is that the pursuit of wealth is destroying the world. It doesn't have to be, but currently wealth is violence. It is a tool whose current use necessitates marginalization, oppression, and the destruction of planetary life systems. And yet we are by and large comfortable behind the palace walls of our skulls. And so we do not venture forth, we do not open the door, we do not find China to take us out and overcome our denial. We do not see the end of the world, and so our connection withers and turns inward. We eschew the beloved community at the peril of our planet and our lives, the lives of our children, our relationships, and our happiness. For it is only in the beloved community, the personal and societal transformation promised by non-violence, that the systems of death may be redeemed. King said it himself, the end is reconciliation. The end is redemption. The end is the creation of the beloved community. It is this type of spirit and this type of love that can transform opposers into friends. It is this type of understanding and goodwill that will transform the deep gloom of the old age into the exuberant gladness of the new age. It is this love which will bring about miracles in the hearts of men. Societal and interpersonal, psychological, verbal, physical, economic, and systematic non-violence represents the final and greatest and possibly last hope of humankind. The beloved community, it's right there in our principles, by the way. The inherent worth of every person and the interconnected web of life. That makes for a beloved community. But too often, even for us, it's just words on a page. We must practice nonviolence at all times, with one another, and when we discover the need in our broader culture. We have a choice. Beloved community or extinction. And the fruits of this choice do not appear once it is made, but ripen over time. Nonetheless, the time to choose is upon us, and our decision will be recorded in the book of destiny now. In your next conversation, in your every interaction. For it shall be as King said it was, that we are tied together in the single garment of destiny, caught in an inescapable network of mutuality.